From Software, a name that has become synonymous with the word pain, as its most well-known games have become infamous at this point for redefining the word difficulty. But what I think they should also be praised for is their mastery of a genre. From Demon's Souls all the way to Elden Ring, From Software has created, popularized, refined, and perfected their own genre through the Soulsborne series. Effectively writing the book on the genre, From Software has become the teacher for other developers, as many of them have taken notes from the Soulsborne series to create their own games inspired by them. These games that attempt to follow in the footsteps of From Software have come to be known as Souls-like games. Just like the Soulsborne series, Souls-like games aren't for everyone, with their high difficulties, sharp skill curves, and sometimes unforgiving gameplay. However, many of us have come to find joy in the struggle of playing these games, and whether it's from repeatedly banging our heads into the same wall or the heightened levels of blood pressure from dying over and over again, we find ourselves continually coming back to these games just to experience the addicting dopamine rush we get after defeating a boss that took us days to beat. Some of the best games that I've played in recent times have been Souls-likes, and while there are a plethora of Souls-likes I would like to talk about, I want to focus on a Souls-like that has perhaps gone beyond just being a Souls-like, Lies of P. Lies of P is an indie Souls-like made by NeoWiz Games based on the original story of Pinocchio, taking place in the fictional and once thriving city of Krat. After a disastrous event known as the Puppet Frenzy caused every mechanical creature in the city to wipe out nearly all the human population, you play as a lone and mysterious puppet who, with the help of the survivors of the frenzy, must journey through the city to find out what caused the Puppet Frenzy and stop it before it goes beyond control, discovering what it means to be human along the way. So I'm a little late to this party, but I figured the iron was still a little warm, plus I wanted to rectify an issue I noticed, that issue being that there are not enough people talking about this game in my opinion. Most of the reviews I've seen for this game have either been extremely positive or rant about how it shamelessly copies from the Soulsborne series. I'm here to tell you that it is anything but the latter. This game is imitation at its finest, and I mean that in every positive way. To be honest, the Soulsborne formula is pretty simple when you break it down. High difficulty, dodge rolls, stamina management, death runbacks, sporadic checkpoints that respawn enemies. Toss all those things and a few others into a game and you've got something resembling a Souls game. Just watch any video from Iron Pineapple on YouTube and you'll see just how easy it is to call something a Souls-like just because it has a dodge roll in it. Imitation and potential copying is inherent when making anything in a genre. In the end, it's all about how the mechanics are implemented and what twists are added to them to make them different and stand out. I can assure you that Lies of P has done more than enough with the Souls formula to stand among the greats, and I will now spend the next 20 or so minutes to convince you of that, starting with the combat. The combat is exactly what you'd be expecting from a Souls-like, weighty, visceral, and satisfying. I want to say most of the notes Lies of P took from the Souls games were put into the gameplay, as it's combined several different mechanics from the Soulsborne series into their own fluid gaming experience. Legion arms, for example, are very similar to the prosthetic arms from Sekiro. You have access to an assortment of robotic arms called Legion arms that come installed with different abilities ranging from an electric blast, a grapple hook, a flamethrower, and more. These arms can be upgraded to increase their damage output and utility. My biggest gripe with these Legion arms is that I wish there were more of them. For weapons called Legion arms, there sure aren't a lot of them because you only get 7 of them, and some of them are more useful than others. I felt like some of them were either too slow, didn't give off enough damage, or were really only useful in certain situations. The grapple hook though is by far the best one and has the most utility. Speaking of Sekiro, blocking is almost discouraged in this game in favor of parrying. Blocking attacks does not fully negate damage. You will still take a portion of damage while blocking. This damage can be regained by attacking the enemy, but will disappear if you are hit before you can land an attack. Bloodborne. You can completely nullify damage by parrying an enemy's attack. Parrying also gives you the chance to stun enemies. Parry enough times and or hit an enemy enough, and their health bar will glow white. If you land a charged attack on them while it's white, you will stun them, allowing you to get a fatal attack to deal heavy damage. Parrying is a crucial part of the combat in this game, as some attacks can only be parried, while others it is far better to parry rather than to try to block or dodge. If you have any intention of getting good at this game, you're gonna have to learn this mechanic. Perhaps the most innovative feature of this game is the weapon assembly system. Each weapon in this game is separated between its blade and handle. These blades and handles can be mixed and matched with those of other weapons to create unique and sometimes devastating combinations. The blades dictate the damage and speed of the weapon, while the handles dictate the attribute the weapon scales to as well as its moveset. Now you might think to just put together a weapon that does maximum damage, which is a valid strategy, but not always the smartest. For me, the moveset of certain handles was often a big determining factor on whether I decided to make a weapon with it or not. Sometimes I entirely skipped over the better scaling and damage a weapon would have had with one handle simply because I didn't like its moveset, it was too slow, or I thought the moveset of another handle was better. On top of that, you can also add modifiers called cranks to the handles of each weapon that allows you to improve its scaling towards a certain attribute. So, putting all of this together, you could take a strength blade, put it onto a handle made for a dexterity weapon so that it will swing faster, then add a crank that improves the strength scaling of that handle so it doesn't lose any of its scaling damage. This does have limits though. Since you can only add one type of crank per handle, adding a strength crank to a primarily dexterity based handle won't do much for it. If the attribute you're trying to improve has a descaling or less, then it's best not to waste the crank on it, as the scaling increase will most likely be negligible. It's clear that the game heavily encourages you to experiment with this system, and honestly, a good chunk of the fun I had in this game was making different weapon combinations and seeing how effective they were or how well they worked with my current build. Something I feel like you should be careful of though is weapon attack range. Combining certain handles and blades can increase the attack range of a weapon, but sometimes that range can be misleading. Sometimes a new weapon combination's range is not as long as it may appear to be, or despite how long a weapon may be, due to the moveset of the handle, the attacks may end up being shorter than you expected. For me, this led to many fatal misjudgments where I thought an attack would land, but it ended up whiffing, and unfortunately led to me dying. But hey, that's the whole point of experimentation, right? If you want to add a little more pizzazz and style to the combat, you can use Fable Arts. If you played Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, they're similar to the weapon arts in Ashes of War. Each blade and handle has their own built-in Fable art that can range from supportive enhancements such as lowering your stamina usage when attacking, to unleashing a flurry of strikes or one devastating blow. Once you really get into the game, there's a point where all these mechanics start to flow together almost seamlessly. You'll be pulling off combos using your Legion Arm and Fable Arts, all while flawlessly parrying every enemy attack. The hardest part to really get down are the parries, as the parry window in this game is sometimes frustratingly small, even smaller than Sekiro's apparently, but given enough time you'll start to learn and understand the best times to parry or to dodge. The skill curve in Lies of P is a tough one to navigate, but it's incredibly satisfying to learn. I would like to give a few quick mentions to the music and level design. I know sometimes it can be pretty hard to appreciate certain soundtracks while you're fighting for your life in these types of games, but this game's soundtrack is fantastic, from the boss themes to the ambient music, and especially the collectible records that you can find. And I absolutely love the art direction of this game. To be honest, I was kind of shocked at how well this game looked graphically, but the creative design of the levels, enemies, and bosses are just, chef's kiss. There was clearly some love and passion put into the enemy designs, from grotesque to creepy to downright imaginative. My simple brain couldn't help but think of just how unique and cool the different enemies and bosses looked. Each new enemy brought something new and sometimes annoying that I had to look out for. Weird mix-ups, delays and pauses, sudden and seemingly unending combos that never seemed to give you a chance to get in an attack. The game would sometimes put some of the worst enemies in a room together with you, almost as if it was trying to ask, okay, what are you gonna do now? Other times it throws a random new elite enemy that you've never seen before and it proceeds to manhandle you 10 times over. Though something that I appreciated was that once you beat an elite enemy, they won't respawn like other enemies. You may find different versions of them later on, but that particular enemy will remain dead. Bosses, on the other hand, can sometimes toe the line between being fun and challenging and stupidly hard. Due to the mechanics of this game, bosses often require you to study them. You can't just run into a boss fight, start wailing on him, and expect to win. Each boss has their own dance that you have to master. You have to take the time to learn what attacks you can parry, which ones to dodge, and which ones you can just block and take the damage from. I often found myself just trying to rush in and hit the boss whenever I could, and dying a lot because of it. It wasn't until I started slowing down and paying attention to what the boss was actually doing that I started making any progress. It might take a few tries to see the pattern, but eventually it will start to click. If the boss is ever seemed too hard, the game does give you the option to summon an NPC to help you during boss fights. He doesn't do a ton of damage, but what he's really great for is taking the boss's aggro away from you. The NPC can definitely trivialize some bosses, but others he may hardly make it past the first phase, so I wouldn't rely too heavily on him. If I had to give any complaint about the enemies and bosses, it's that their tracking is ridiculous. You could be half an arena away from them and somehow their attacks will still find a way to hit you. Dodging certain attacks in this game is already hard enough as is, but the ridiculous tracking can make some attacks literally impossible to dodge, forcing you to parry them if you want to avoid damage. On top of that, enemy aggro range is weirdly large. Some enemies will just continue to chase you no matter how far you run, which can make runbacks after death particularly annoying. And the world is teeming with questions. While not completely devoid of life, you can see that the city of Krat is in an already bad and worsening situation. Then you see that things aren't much better outside the city with mutant zombies roaming around, and then the characters seem to vary from people just trying to survive to shady villains who are using the whole situation to their advantage. You are thrown into the middle of this while things only seem to get worse and worse as you progress through the story, with the only way to find out how it all ended up like this being the scattered and tattered remains left by the victims of it all. You can see all of this as you journey through each of the well-connected areas, and man does this game know how to give that satisfying feeling of unlocking a shortcut leading back to a checkpoint. It was genuinely fun clearing out one area and going to the next and seeing what enemies and challenges the game had waiting for me. While I may absolutely love this game, that doesn't mean it doesn't have some issues. I already went into some of my problems earlier, but these complaints are more targeted towards specific parts of the game, most of which kind of involve in the story. There are a few problems I have with the leveling in this game. First of all, the attributes you can level are very vague as to what they do. When you try to level up for the first time, you'll see your average upgradable attributes such as vitality, stamina, and weight. But after that, you'll see these things called motivity, technique, and advance. Now, dear viewer, using all the RPG knowledge you may have gained up to this point, please tell me what you think those last three mean. I'll give you a second. Got your answer? Good. It's most likely wrong, because motivity is strength, technique is dexterity, and advance is basically magic or status effects. The game at no point bothers to tell you what any of these attributes mean or what they do. After some time playing, you might be able to figure it out, but by that point, you will have most likely put some points into an attribute for a build that you didn't want. I'm all for letting the player figure things out for themselves. Dark Souls certainly didn't hold your hand in any way, but at least they give you the ability to look at the explanations for the uniquely named attributes that you can level up so you don't waste your time putting points into something that might be a useless skill. Speaking of, experience acquisition in this game is slow. As with most Souls-likes, you gain experience by defeating enemies, and this experience also doubles as currency. In Lies of P, this experience is called Ergo. Enemies do not drop much Ergo upon death. It's enough to allow you to level up and buy the occasional item here and there, but once you start getting into the higher levels, you better start being real picky about what you decide to spend your points on, especially when the prices are as high as they are in this game. Now, this was probably a conscious design choice, as this forces you to make the decision between items or potential levels in true Souls-like fashion. But if I'm given the minimum amount of Ergo needed to either level up or buy items, best believe I'm gonna choose to level up, which is a shame because many of the items in Lies of P are actually pretty useful. Now, this wasn't too much of a problem for me since I tend not to use items too often, but there are a lot of consumable items in Lies of P, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of them probably go unused during the average playthrough because players would rather spend their Ergo on levels rather than items. It's part of the reason why I have a problem with the lack of explanation. Those first 20 to 40 levels I think are crucial for getting you started on the build you want, or to at least properly use the weapon you want. Now, the game does allow you to respec your character, but it's not unlocked till about halfway through the game. So as interesting and thought-provoking as the story is, it's a little disjointed. Stopping the puppet frenzy is the main conflict for about half of the game. As we make our way to stop the frenzy, we see that there are greater things at play other than the frenzy. Once we hit about the midpoint of the game, the story takes a slight pivot to focus on the petrification disease, the mutants, and Ergo, which makes sense as they seem to be the greater issue at hand. The problem lies in the fact that the puppet frenzy is kind of pushed to the side in favor for these new goals and objectives. The initial threat of the frenzy is basically sidelined so we can take care of the main villain. That would be fine if the initial plot turned out to be a smaller part of the larger plot as a whole, but the puppet frenzy is distinctly held as a separate issue from the main plot. And honestly, the weakest part of the story I would say is the main villain. He's not introduced until about midway through the game, and we still hardly see him after that. Yet despite that, he has this grandiose plan involving his own personal backstory, several different characters, and has multiple moving parts. In fact, this game starts when his plan is in its end phase. It seems like we were supposed to see and learn more about his character throughout the game, but only get to know him near the end. Maybe his role in the story was cut down due to time constraints or money, but what could have been an interesting antagonist got regulated to an average take over the world villain. And he isn't the only character who has this problem. There are several characters that seem like they should have more story or background behind them, but for one reason or another, didn't get explored or had little explanation. Though that's not to say all the characters were like that. There were actually several characters that were fleshed out pretty well, one character in particular being Vanini. He actually had a very well fleshed out and interesting story to discover as you go through the game. He also had the most personality and charisma out of everybody, but that may have been why his character was so interesting to learn about and to find his story to. Unfortunately, though, not all the characters can say the same. I'll get more on that later. I think the main reason these plot holes, for lack of a better word, exist is because they tried to tell a linear, more traditional story while also trying to do the vague, cryptic, environmental storytelling that the Soulsborne series does so well. It's not that they were done poorly, they actually complemented each other very well in certain areas. There were simply times where I think the two storytelling methods ended up butting heads with each other and got in the other's way, leading to unfulfilling moments and character stories. It was kind of disappointing because I enjoyed talking to the different characters and learning more about their backstories as I did their stories along with the main quest. One thing that I wish I saw more of throughout the game were the repercussions from lying. Through the entire game, it's hinted that lying or telling the truth has an effect on your character in some way, lying making you more human while the truth does the opposite. I like this mechanic, and it's a great way to bring in Pinocchio's most known aspect. The two main problems I have with this is that we don't really see the results of the lies and the truths until the very end of the game, and sometimes the decisions on whether to lie or not is not very clear. This was probably intentionally vague in an attempt to surprise the player and show them the consequences of their decisions at the end, but I feel like that only really works if you see some kind of build-up to these eventual consequences. It doesn't even have to be big, it can just be small hints here and there. The only evidence that our decisions matter is the notifications we get saying our springs are reacting after making a decision or performing certain actions. But we have no idea what this means or what it is doing. Aside from the nose on the portrait growing as you lie, at no point do we see this have any effect on our character or how other people react to him. This is the equivalent of going around a huge dungeon in an RPG and pulling these random levers. The game is telling you that something happened every time you pull a lever, but you don't see any evidence that something changed until the very end of the dungeon, but by that point, you don't know what has changed because the game never told you what moved to begin with. On top of that, some decisions are not very clear as to whether they are a truth or a lie, so you could actively be trying to lie during a decision but choose truth by mistake, thinking you lied and not even know it. Sure, the portrait is meant to portray how much you've lied, but it doesn't help if you've already made the decision. Given how much lying determines your ending, this lack of clarity could lead you to getting an ending that you didn't want, like I did. Speaking of, okay, so this part is much more of a personal gripe with the story as well as a big spoiler for one of the endings. You've been warned. My first playthrough, I ended up getting the bad ending because I decided to trust Geppetto at the end. Now I admit he always seemed a bit shady throughout the game, but he never seemed particularly evil. Even when it's revealed that he started the puppet frenzy, I held some reservations on him being completely evil because I assumed they would explain his reasoning. So imagine my surprise when I saw Pinocchio killing all the main characters at the hotel with Geppetto in the ending cutscene. You know, all the characters that you got to know and, help out throughout the whole game. And then Geppetto replacing them with robots to add insult to injury. I was completely dumbfounded by this ending, because how was I supposed to know he would do that? He had no reason to do it, and we see no hint towards his true motivations that would make him want to do that aside from wanting to bring back his son. Oh yeah, and the puppet frenzy? The whole crux of the game, never explained. Not even in a cliffhanger sense when they give you part of the truth and save the rest for a later part. I mean, aside from telling us Geppetto started it, they straight up do not take the time to tell us any more about it. And there's still a quarter of the game left by the time we get that revelation. Again, I don't know if they're planning to explore more of this in a future DLC, but if it wasn't clear, I was pretty annoyed about getting this ending. I may have made a lot of comparisons to the Souls series in this video, and to be frank, those comparisons were almost impossible not to make. Many of the mechanics and much of the world building is very reminiscent of the Souls series, and anyone who's played any of them will immediately pick up on the similarities. Though, despite what some other people might say, I don't think that this is a bad thing. Frankly, if no one told you who made this game, you honestly would think that this game was made by From Software. Lies of P has masterfully integrated the best parts of the Soulsborne series into their own world and gaming experience that, in my opinion, can stand proudly beside them. Heck, at this point, the developers could write their own book based on the notes they took from Software and call it How to Learn from Greatness. With that being said, it would be an absolute detriment to your experience if you were to play this game like it's any of the games from the Soulsborne series. While it may be heavily inspired by them, Lies of P is its own game and should be experienced as such. I cannot recommend this game enough. Sorry if it felt like this video was a bit incohesive or disjointed. I had a lot to say about this game and I didn't quite really know how to get it all down on paper. Even now I feel like I have a lot more to say about this game that I haven't really gotten out in this video. But if anything, let that be a sentiment as to how much I enjoyed this game and how much I think you should be playing this game yourself, because it is a genuinely good game in my opinion. Please, go play it. Outside of that, the last thing for this video, I would like to mention that I realized that the lengths of time between each video that I've posted, like this being like the 4th video I've ever posted on this channel, are like months, months apart, if not half a year apart. And I would like to start changing that. I'd like to get into a somewhat regular schedule. I mean, don't expect these things to be coming out like weekly, because I can't do that quite yet. But I do want to make this more of a frequent thing and less of a sporadic, I'll post a video when I want to. And me putting this out here in this video is also makes me responsible for doing it, because now I've put it out in public, and now everyone who watches this video knows that I said this, and now I'm responsible for keeping up with it. So I would like to be a little bit more active on this channel, and that's not just with bigger videos. I'm thinking of doing like small shorts too. So with any hope and a whole lot of diligence and discipline and time, I will make this a more active channel. So I would like to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.